Hey, this is Adam here. Just wanted to pop on here before we started today's conversation and tell you about a really exciting event that we're going to be a part of this fall, October 6th at Bound Bookshop in York, Pennsylvania. We are so excited to be participating in the book launch for Madison Tyler Nelson's Portrait of a Haunting. This is just an incredible book that I think so many people are going to really love and enjoy. So we are so excited, one, to have had a conversation with her that you'll hear on the pod, but also in person being part of the book launch on release day at Bound Bookshop in York. Tickets are free at boundbookshop.com, and we hope to see all of our friends in the mid Atlantic area to come celebrate this really special book. All right, on to the conversation. Welcome back to Horrifically Well Read, Bled, and Said. We are so excited today to be talking to Jennifer Givhan, the author of The Sleeping Sisters, coming August 18th. One of our, I think it's safe to say, one of our favorite books that we have read this year. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Aw, that's so kind. Thank you both. That is medicine to my soul. So thank you. I think that when we're looking for books on NetGalley, obviously the cover work of your book is absolutely stunning, but it draws you in. And we requested it and we both read it and we're like, okay, we got to talk to her. So it's evocative. I think that it fits the narrative so well. Like, sometimes you pick up a book and it's like, wow, they didn't do that cover right, but the book is so good. But I think everything goes together so well. So how would you go about explaining to our listeners, how would you position your book and pitch it to them? So a couple of the ways that I like to think about the book in terms of bringing new readers in is my Chicana interpretation, which is my Mexican American Indigenous interpretation of The Girl with the Green Ribbon, that childhood story that creeped a lot of us out. I know that I read it when I was probably around 10, 11, somewhere around there. And so I can go into that more later, but that story stuck with me for my entire life. And then I really loved Carmen Maria Machado's interpretation of it in The Husband Stitch. And so that has just been kind of my background with like where I first encountered the headless woman, if you will. And so it's a reimagining of the headless woman. It's also a Chicana interpretation of Pan's Labyrinth, another movie that I saw probably in my very early 20s and has stuck with me. And a lot of the work that I do in my novels is reclamation, is social justice, but I always come from it from the perspective of the macabre, the psychologically off kilter. And like a lot of that has to do with trauma work from my own life and my own mothering. But so Pan's Labyrinth, The Girl with the Green Ribbon, and then the main entryway in for readers, I think, will be that it is inspired by real events here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where my family and I live. And so 15 years ago, we were taking a walk on the mesa, on the West Mesa where we live, right beside the Sleeping Sister volcanoes, which are 5 cinder cone volcanoes that are dormant but not dead. And so that's always sort of been on my mind and haunted me, knowing that we live so close to these volcanoes. And I was told about the women and girls who were murdered and buried on the mesa. And the way that the person who told me about them described them was so callous, and it really stuck with me. And they said, basically, there's a bunch of hookers buried here. And that was just like, just really upset my soul. They said hookers and I heard daughters. And so really that is the impetus behind every story that I write, like just re-seeing girls and women not from the way that society has labeled us, mislabeled us, but but from the perspective of within the individual or within the community, within the family, whatever the case may be. So for this book, very much inside the individual who has experienced these West Mesa murders. And so all of this through a very magical, real lens that comes naturally to me. It's the way I tell stories. And so people would always start to tell me that I was writing horror. And I was like, really? Okay. I didn't know that. I just was writing my heart and soul. So those are the three entryways: the West Mesa murders, the girl with the green ribbon, and Pan's Lab.
I love how you said they said prostitutes and I heard daughters, or
Yep.
hookers and I heard daughters. Like, that is seeing the humanity in each person and not vilifying, even if they were not vilifying sex
Right.
work,
Exactly.
seeing them as women. And it's interesting, immediately I go into the whole concept of how they say, like, Jesus befriended the prostitutes and, was okay and it's just like, yet you hear such vitriol towards, and the fact that it's like, oh, well, they're a lower caste in society, so who cares that they got hurt? So I love that that shocked you and upset you enough and propelled you to want to write their stories and really give voice to them. And then also how you're, taking in your Mexican and indigenous history and just making this such a special book. I love that you're writing about social justice. And I too, for the longest time, did not realize I was reading horror. So I love that you're like, I didn't know I was writing horror, because this is the kind of thing where, horror comes across like it needs to be all black and red and scary. And it's not. It's anything that is horrific. And certainly the experiences that happen with these women are, but also the stories that you're telling within the book with the families involved. There are several horrific elements. So let's get into that.
Yeah, I think definitely, it's funny that again, that thing, and we talked about this plenty of times, to be a woman and to be a woman of color in this country is to experience horrors every day,
Yeah.
and like from the most like banal aside, kind of like that conversation that you just had, where it's like it it's just the assumption that you're gonna agree that it's just, oh, it's just a person that did something like this. So it's like it's this almost like, "Hey, you wanna see a body?" Like, it's a cool thing where instead of this tragedy. And, after reading this book, it definitely sent me on a wormhole of researching the case and everything, and the callousness with which it's reported, the callousness with which it was investigated, and, the things where it was like, people that disappeared that the police were like, "I don't really wanna look into it." Like, I don't like, they were basically just saying they didn't care. And so it is important to have, books like this, but then also you kinda talk about, I saw, like, on your social media, some of the detectives that are doing good work,
Exactly.
trying to, like, continue where it's like, because this is, I think it's what, 20 years since the remains were first found,
Yes.
to not let it go because it has not been solved. Even though it seems like there's been so many leads and so many things pointing to it, you've got so many families that still are just sitting there like, "What happened?"
Exactly. And I think that I've always been bothered by serial killer narratives. I know that we tend to, and I as well tend to enjoy getting inside a creepy mind. Like, it's not necessarily that bothers me, but just kind of all of the attention and all of the almost, I mean, almost praise, because you know, it's, it's a kind of a, what do you call it?
It's like a glamorization of the
Yes.
death, right? And
Exactly.
and forgetting that I went through a period where I was, like, uncomfortable even listening to true crime because I was like, this is a story. This is truly someone's life.
Yeah, and it becomes that whole, like, they only killed 4 people, it's not that interesting. It's like,
Right.
you don't even, like, hear the victims' names or, like, you can say all the killers' names, but the victims' names, not nearly as much, that kind of thing, yeah.
Right. And so the fact that this is still unsolved really lent itself to my examination of what actually happened, how was it received in the city, and who were the victims. And it's not true crime at all, as as
And
you both know from reading it. It's fiction. It's completely fictionalized, but just that psychological aspect of what happens. And so I'll go back to the girl with the green ribbon. So in that story, it ends when the husband and they've okay. Jenny and Alfred were little kids together, met, liked each other, fell in love, got married eventually. And throughout the whole marriage, he's asking if he can pull her ribbon off. And finally, she's on her deathbed and he still wants to pull her ribbon off. And so she does. And when she does, her head falls off, plops to the ground. That's the end of the story. And so very similar in Carmen Maria Machado's story as well. And so for me, it was like, what happens next? What happens after her head falls off? And so what do we do in the aftermath? And so the question for me in the epigraph to the book is about how do the dead mother us? What does that mean to be mothered by the dead? And so I write about monstrous mamas. I write about about not just writing through, about living through and mothering through trauma. And so this felt like a very natural extension for me psychologically to figure out what does that mean then to mother living children as a woman whose head, literally, figuratively, metaphorically, what have you, our head has fallen off.
What does that mean to you, though, to be mothered by the dead? Like, I've never heard that, and that's pretty evocative. I would love to hear a bit more on that.
So my mom, actually, when she was a girl, had her thyroid removed. And back in the day, they really did just slit her neck and take her thyroid out. And so she's got this gnarly scar across her throat. And so my whole childhood, like my mom is my larger than life, like goddess. I mean, she really is the everything in my world. And so motherhood is that big for me. And so it really did look like my mom had just been murdered and sewn back together. And so much of my mom's stories throughout my childhood that she would tell me, whether based on her own life or stories of, fictionalized stories that she would tell me about, like La Llorona, for instance, had such an impact on me. And she has several traumatic stories, but there was one major trauma that really was like a death in her life. And so in many ways, looking back now, I realized that there were a lot of childlike aspects about her that she had kind of stopped. I don't want to say stopped living, but like there was just a part of her that remained very young. And it was like I mean, she went into books, she went into literature, she went into the library in order to survive, like literally to survive and to
There's
stay.
a lot of discussion talked about like that just because we age chronologically doesn't mean that we age, emotionally, mentally. We can be paused in that. But yeah, and that dissociation is a
Yeah,
true survival technique.
absolutely. And so exactly, thank you. And so that is really the work that I've done as an adult and as a mother. Now my children have become teenagers and my son is 19 at this point. And so now I'm realizing, looking back on my own childhood, like, oh, okay, that's what was going on. And so I correlate for myself that death of the mother as the major trauma, that separating point between everything that came before and everything that came afterward. And then I just transmuted that. I really felt like I opened myself up. I asked spirit, I asked my ancestors, I asked my guides if they would work through me and allow me to channel that through. What would it mean on a more visceral, literal level for someone, you know? And then that's where it sort of slid into the horror realm, but I still think of it as almost like, I mean, folktale for sure, 100% folktale, maybe kind of fairy tale realm as well.
Yeah, there's a definite blend of genres here that you've been able to like twist together that come to like a wonderful bouquet of different
Hmm.
elements. One of the characters that I loved the most was the reporter or the investigator.
Jeanette. Yeah.
Yes, just David. And really, I think I started my reading career a lot with thrillers and just identifying with, someone who's police and just, working through these like novels. And so I just loved Jeanette's integrity, her commitment, and just like how much she was guided throughout the process as well.
Yeah, and I guess it's a good time to talk about how this is like sort of a dual narrative with Fortuna, who has, something that has very shockingly happened in her past that's similar to kind of what you're talking about, that kind of event that part of her was left behind during. And I think that we can kind of think about that in our own lives. Like there's certain things that happen traumatically that I think you leave a piece of yourself in that moment. And I think, that's a really great way like to say it, that like something stops there and you carry on because you have to and all that kind of stuff, but it definitely leaves its mark, whether literally or emotionally. And she has that, and it made me think, with your mom, there's a scene with Poe that she would kind of touch the
Huh.
scar, and I was just wondering if that came from reality too. But then also the dual narrative is with Jeanette, who's a detective who works with Fortuna's husband, who also has a very personal connection to the Sleeping Sisters as well. So just brilliantly tied together. And I
It
just said a
is.
bunch of things. So
Well, that's it,
whatever
because,
you
like,
want
I
to
was like,
say.
"Where the hell is this going?" Because there were so many different things, and all of a sudden it was like, "Oh my god, this is brilliantly woven." And
Ah,
it was really, I mean, when you think of, like, a braid and it's 3 different
mhm.
story and it just all fit. I mean, that is you. You
Yeah.
did it. Came in
Yeah.
here and we're like, "I'm like, you did.
In terms of the touching of Poe, her daughter touching her neck, it was like the relief map is what I thought of, and that map back into childhood, because what you were saying too is such a wonderful analysis, and leaving a part of ourself and continuing, but also like what we bring of ourself at that stopping point, I think is also important, because I'm realizing how much of my mom brought childlike wonder and
Mm,
joy and fairy tales and magic and possibility with her from that child that like just adamantly like refused to give up, refused to, to stay a victim, and who went into literature. And so she brought that into my childhood. And then I faced traumas in early childhood and teenhood that I've then carried into motherhood. But I staunchly clung to that wonder. And I feel like that's something that Fortuna does very well in the narrative, and that I felt like that was a guiding principle of her character, that she loved her children. She loved spending time with her children because she could inhabit that space of wonder and curiosity, that even though she called it a curse that her mom had handed down to her, and it very much felt like a curse, it was also a protective measure as well, like that terrarium, that glass that she encases her family in. And so that's really what I wanted to explore, was like how much of these survival techniques hinder us, and how much do they help us, to survive and to grow and to thrive, and can we see them as both, And so I think of some of my characters and some of my moms, my monstrous mamas or my toxic mamas in my previous books, have been criticized for having kind of like, for instance, some of my moms have been called like immature mothers, or, that kind of thing. And it's like, well, I mean, let's talk about this.
Yeah, let's
First of
talk
all,
about
we
it."
just love to hate on women, you know?
Yes.
That's just, I mean, like, society just loves to hate on women, and moms in particular. But so I really wanted to think about that, like, what does it mean to be immature versus what does it mean to keep, like, childlike hope of, and that we call it childlike, but really, isn't it just, like, hopeful? Isn't it
yeah.
just,
It's
filled with
funny
love?
because like male characters are complex, women characters are
Yeah,
problematic, right?
yeah,
Like that's
unlikable, yeah, toxic.
yeah, no, I love that. That is really beautiful actually to say that like from that trauma, there are good things that, can be brought forward and not obviously what happened, but the response and the resiliency that it can bring. And definitely in this book, there are multiple moments where, Fortuna's like, I could give up, but it's like her love is so strong. She's like, I don't care if it is impossible to anyone else, it's not to me. Like, we're going to keep going. And
Right,
I don't care what anyone says. It's like, there's a part where she says, like, you might not believe, but I believe enough for both of us,
yeah,
and that's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah, I just feel like she really embraces that, like, mother type of, energy. It just exudes from her of, what are you gonna say, like, mama bear or whatever. I mean, she just is like, you don't she's the way that you want a mother to be passionate.
Yeah, and it's that interesting thing of like she kind of feels like her life and her children's lives and her family's lives are set on a tragic path. but like she also doesn't she fully expects it at any moment, but at the same time doesn't accept it either.
Yes.
Which like I think that a lot of people that maybe were born to adverse circumstances and stuff like that, that's such a like a rallying cry and a really like hopeful and beautiful thing to take from this work too.
Thank you. And so going back to the cover, I wanted to explain a little bit that the original cover that the designer came with was not this cover at all. And so it actually had a sunflower, several sunflowers, but a very prominent sunflower with eyes, or like an eye, I guess, a watchful. And that comes from Fortuna's dreams of her mom and running through the
Mhm.
sunflower field. So those are prominent images in the book. But there was just something about the yellow and red and black. And it's so funny that you had said red and black, that struck me as not of my
It's
like
the vibes, right? It like doesn't, it doesn't put you in the setting of where the story takes place either. I think the colors that you chose for this, I mean, it feels like when you see words like, yeah, sorry, go on, keep
I
going.
was like, no, exactly. Everything you're saying was like sunset. Sunset. It has to be that dawn. It's that liminal space of either the sun is just rising or the sun is just setting, but we're about to go into this magical liminal time here. And so that now the sunset colors that are evoked from the current cover. But so I honestly felt like it was too psychedelic, the previous one. And I was like, people are gonna come to it for a drug trip and they're not gonna get it. Like they're gonna get a different kind of trip. Like for sure, this is
Yeah.
psychological thriller. But it's just I don't think it's the vibe. So I went searching, and as I said, I'm obsessed with headlessness
Mhm.
for all of the reasons that we've discussed. And I had written a poetry collection called Landscape with Headless Mama. So I really wanted that sense. And Fortuna talks about it in the book several times about headless women and how like covers of books, covers of magazines have the woman without the head. And so I wanted that sense of headlessness while also not perpetuating that idea of a woman being any woman. It doesn't matter who she is. It's just her body. It's all about her body. And I didn't want to reinforce that, but I still wanted to evoke it. And so I went searching for artwork. And I went into the Latino community because, first of all, I'm Latina and I love to support fellow Latina artists. And then also because of that I was looking for that magical real vibe or surreal. And so like Frida Kahlo is a major inspiration of
Yeah.
mine, along with a lot of the other Mexican surreal artists, so-called surreal, like Leonora Carrington, Remedios Varro, and Ala de la Torre, who is a contemporary artist that I love. And she actually did a previous cover of mine of a poetry collection. So I was looking and I stumbled across an artist whose work just hit me immediately. He's Brazilian. His name is Rafael Silveira. And he just paints these gorgeous images of people with flower faces. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. The sense of like, of being in the earth, of the earth, from the earth,
Yes.
growing still amidst, that like burial aspect, that being
Yes.
mothered by the dead. And then also she was wearing a turtleneck over her throat that looked like flesh. And I was like, ooh, oh, perfect. And so
It just like it hits you. I can see why you were so like, this is for me. This is the type of cover that we have a few authors that we have like their cover of their books like framed. This is one I would love to put not just there,
Yeah.
but like I would put this one in like my downstairs guest bathroom that everybody can see.
Yeah, it
Like,
is
it's
art
just
for sure.
it is. It's like I love
Mhm.
flowers. I love depictions of, like, women and all like, it fits for all of it for me. You know how you said it's, like, of the earth, from the earth, like, it just gives so much
Yeah,
just in that one,
absolutely.
the colors and everything, the vibe, so I love that you got to draw upon your community too. I mean, I think that just makes it all the more special
thank
of talking to them. I know you ended up using a Brazilian, but I just think that in general, looking for who's gonna best fit that art for you and that because it sounds like you're like, "I know I need something different. It wasn't this," but it's like then all of a sudden it just hits you as like, okay, a magical aha moment itself of connection of this is the birth. This is what's gonna happen. This is coming forward. This is mine.
just so excited. I mean, I sent it off to my editor as an example of like
Mhm.
maybe the designer could do something, this is just this is the vibe I'm going for. But the designer had fallen in love with it, so reached out to the artist and it all magically came together.
Wow.
And so I was like,
Wow. I
Meant
mean,
to
my
be.
I think it's a huge
manifest.
part of book selling is, if people don't pay attention to the name, if they're not, I mean, for years I couldn't have told you who wrote a certain book, you know what I mean? And it wasn't at that level of readership, right? I just wanted like if you're like, I just need a really good book. And oftentimes I think people, and this is something like I've wanted to bring up, and I think we need to do a reel on this again because I've done a lot of shows. We've had a lot of interviews. And at the beginning of like, over 100 episodes ago, we would say like, who would you recommend as like a horror author to like, segue from what people think is horror? And there was always like Rachel and Grady would come up. And it's like, we have talked to so many more people now. And you have a book here that I think is perfect for give it to your people that typically aren't reading horror, that say, I can't because you can on this.
Mhm.
And you will have the best thriller. Like you said, you'll have the magical realism, you'll have motherhood, there's complex social justice. Like there's so much, as I've continued to say, just woven in here. But to me, with stories like this, you make it, there's scary elements of I didn't want to stop reading it. And I was like, in terms of intensity, I guess is what I should say
Mhm.
and just genuinely engaged. And I think that that's how we start to bring more people into the horror reading community with authors like yourself that write horror, but not exactly just that black and red, if you want to say it for that.
Right, right, right. I think of mine as I got a wonderful blurb and it's like a book title, a poetry book title of mine. So it was called Belly to the Brutal. And that's like the idea of being beautiful and brutal at the same time. And like that's what I hope that the cover conveys now is that there's not just the horror side of it. There is the beauty as well. And that's equal in my mind and in my heart as I'm writing. So like I told my editor that I was writing a horror and she read an early draft of it, like about 150 pages of it. She's like, "This is crime. This is thriller." And I was like, "Okay." And she said, "Just make it crime, make it thriller." I was like, "Okay, I'm going to make it, here we go." Finished the book. She read it again. She's like, "Oh no, this is horror." I was like, "Ah." Even when I like specifically sat down and I was like, "Okay, it's crime." Nope, it was horror, she said.
Love that. I love that a horror book wanted to come out.
Yeah.
It needed to be that and just in revising of it, it's like you finessed it even further into that. And I'm glad you did.
I love it too because it's funny because, your two characters here, even though Jeanette is, literally haunted, by the ghosts of her cousins who were two of the victims, Jeanette thinks she's in a thriller, right? For a very long time.
Yes.
And until something happens, which reader like is one of the best moments in a book that I've read in many, many years, actually. And I'm assuming you know what I'm talking about,
Yes,
but
there's
I think that that's really interesting because like it really works on so many different levels for that. And like the fact that like I can even say like this character doesn't realize that they're in this kind of story shows the power of your characterization. And I think that every single character in this book is so complex and three-dimensional. And that adds to the mystery of it because there is not until everything comes together, there's not a moment that I think anyone is innocent or
good.
guilty, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
like it really is one of those where I'm like, this is one of the best murder mystery suspense thrillers I've read in I don't
A
know how long.
long
Because
time.
like even when I thought I knew, I didn't really know.
That is really hard to find
Yeah.
because like, and I'm not picking on anybody in general, but I think for, of authors or anything like I'm saying more for myself that being neurodivergent,
Mhm.
pattern recognition, it's hard to surprise me. I think where I'm the person
Or it's
that
that thing like you
also
said.
that spoils it for
Yeah.
myself
Either
or like,
spoils it or authors cheat and purposely
Right.
don't give readers the
yes,
clues that they need to
yes,
figure it out.
yes.
But this is not that,
It is not
listeners. This
that.
is not that either. And so, like, it is fair and it makes sense and it comes together beautifully. And there are so many different sort of things that have to come together.
Yes.
Are just so wonderful.
And that's what I found really important is your ability to like intricately do this, right? Because it's one of those things where, to your point, we read a lot of books, and I'm not, again, not picking on anyone in specific, but like over the years, when I have read thriller books, I can think of the one book, the Sanatorium book. I really liked the book the whole time, and then once it got to the end, I was like, that couldn't have been guessed. Like that
It came
wasn't
down
like
to
that wasn't fair. Like
because it came down to like remembering a picture on a desk in an office in one scene in the first 50 pages, kind of thing.
and it was just like, okay. And I don't think it was, but it was like
Something
it was like it was obscure. It was very obscure, and it's like I then want to like then it makes me give pause to like the other books, and do I want to do this because you spend a lot of time and energy and investment in that, and even like I know a lot of people like that book Hardwood, and I wanted to love that, where she's like out in the wood, and there's so many things of like she's traveling, and that's a literature one, but it's like she's, and the woods part was great, but like how everything ended up for me, I just felt like didn't connect. And I feel like, but when someone does it right, it's one of those where you're like, you've got to watch this movie or you've got to read this book. And I think you just freaking delivered it. I mean, and I'm just impressed, and I don't mean it in a condescending way, just more like you had so many elements that had to work so well again and again and again and again, and you never faltered. And I just was like, hell, this is I haven't found a book that knit this together so well that made me so satisfied, surprised, and like
I was actually like the last couple of days, knowing we were about to talk, I was revisited the book and I was like, I'm just gonna like look at like specific things here, and then I like looked down after an hour and I'm like, oh, I'm just reading it again.
You two are just giving me the biggest hugs. Like,
no, it is. I mean, you have a real skill set that you can do that. I think is what I'm trying to get at is it's like that doesn't seem like that happens by accident. So what's your process for I'm picturing the guy
like I'm picking a giant map with the red line.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, with the guy going like pointing to it, and I'm wondering, is that what you do? Like, how did you do this?
Yeah, I should have brought my journal into the room with me. I don't have it, but I do keep several journals, and I get these giant, the 8x10 and it's like hundreds of pages, and I fill the whole dang thing. So I do write every thought that comes into my head. I need to organize it better because it ends up being one of those crazy, serial killer maps on the wall, but in a notebook form. But the other thing I do is I print out physical maps, or I buy physical maps of the space, and I actually see it physically, and I like have people moving around, and I actually have
that makes sense.
Aphantasia. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
Yes,
where
you can't see. It's
I don't have a mind's eye. Yeah. I close my eyes.
That's the only way I think is like I'm always thinking in pictures. Yeah. So this is cool. So this is your tool. Like you have to like manipulate it with your hands.
Exactly. And so my kids and I like really like action figures and Barbies and all that kind of thing. Like, and like they have aphantasia. My daughter has aphantasia. So I think there's something about like the physicality of it. So having it in the notebook, having it on a map, and I'm like moving people around helps me to be able to keep track of all of these elements, these moving elements.
I'm thinking like that, I haven't written a book, and I don't know how I would approach that. But as I'm talking to you here, I'm in my picture in my brain, I'm seeing, okay, now I'm going to move this, and then I'm going to move that to remember I've already done this. And almost like you can see how that could work for you of like, okay,
or even like, there's certain things that happen at certain times, and certain people are there going back and being like, okay, this is where they're at.
Here or here, right? Where are they?
Yeah, like taking it, like I'm thinking like taking like Candyland or like a Clue. Like here's my people. They were in this room at the time. And
this is some marketing though. This is a good reel for you to have that map out and have you playing with your action figures.
Yeah, I would watch that. I would share that. And by the way, Adam's like, I hope she knows that it's you that keeps commenting on all of her things, that she's not thinking that I'm being inappropriate. I'm like, yeah, fire, this is great. I was like, I'm pretty sure she knows, but just to address that here. Poor Adam's
That's
embarrassed because no one can ever tell. It's both of us moderate.
Yes,
Like,
That's so cool. My daughter and I write together actually as well. We write
Yes.
YA, horror, thriller, and middle grade at this point, but we're moving into YA. And so I very much understand like family plurality of like, we just talk about everything so that I end up like when I'm talking to people, I sometimes just say we.
yeah.
And it's like I actually I don't necessarily have a condition. I just think of myself in the family plural.
you
And so
don't have a
that
condition.
definitely is a dynamic in of Fortuna's and really of Jeanette's too. So I'm gonna give it like a little clue here for people and for you too, especially that sometimes I did think of Jeanette as like very, 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 very close to Fortuna. If you see what I mean there.
Yes. Yes. Interesting. Well, that makes the very complicated relationship with the husband
That's where I'm going with my head. Is
very
really
interesting too. So,
Yes.
which
Okay.
again, there's so many that's such a trope that could go to stereotypical levels, or I don't want to say trope, or something that, kind of what Mongo does, or like this idea of like this hidden relationship and things. And I love that you never go all the way over into it being like what you think maybe it could be.
Right.
And again, that's just like, I'm like, this book just never plays into
Yeah.
like the stereotypes or what you
Mhm.
want it to be. It's always what it has to be and what it should be. And like for you saying like that you kind of spoke to the gods and the things, I'm like, yeah, I see that.
And for me too, it was like everything has to be double in order for it to be a murder mystery.
Mm.
But in order to sustain that level of atmosphere, of that, like what is happening here in terms of reality versus other world possibility, everything actually had to have three parts to it. And that is how I maintained that suspense and that disequilibrium, that tension that I hope was unsettling throughout the
It
entire book.
is. It was. I
Everything
love
was
that.
trifold, and so the braid, it was like, I would bring a piece in, and that would have 3 layers, and then that would have 3
Yeah.
layers, and that
Yes.
happened on
I believe
revision
that.
too, like, some of that was my editor at Little Brown helping me to see, so that I had already put those in place, but, like, bring that more toward the front, bring that more toward the beginning, make sure that the reader knows what everything that Fortuna knows when she knows it, and so some of that, I almost did hide some of Fortuna's experiences toward, and I was gonna reveal them more toward the middle, but it was like, no, we need to know what she knows from the beginning. And so some of that really is just the brilliance of readers coming in and seeing you and what you're doing and like, helping guide us. So I don't want to, it was the gods, but it was also like the
Yeah.
editor
Yeah.
got too.
Yeah.
Some of her decision making, right? Like it gives you
Yes,
like some
exactly.
not knowing her experiences when you do would have you question her. And the fact is, like, you brilliantly have her questioning herself. So you already
Exactly.
have that.
Right.
So you don't need that sort of like the reader not knowing the things that she does, which is it's so that's really fantastic. Another aspect that I really wanted to talk about with this book that I thought was really fantastic too is the way that you kind of address in a different way almost like the undocumented experience of people in
Glad you saw
America,
that.
because
Thank
while she's not exactly, an undocumented person in the traditional sense, she is too, right? Where it's like, okay, the kids, don't have like the things, birth certificates and number, like all that kind of stuff. They're really trying to live off the grid and shows how difficult that is, especially like in a relationship, which I've known plenty of people, friends and things that are that way, that maybe the husband or the wife is documented, but the others aren't. And that creates a different kind of tension and fear and just going to the store and all the things that, especially at the beginning of the book.
Absolutely. That is such an essential issue that I wanted to highlight. And at the same time, it's not my own personal experience, which I don't think writers do need to write our own personal experiences. It's just that I tend to write from what I have experienced or my family has or and so all of that was just to say that I never have written the immigrant experience and I don't necessarily feel called to. I feel like there are so many of my colleagues who were doing an amazing job, like Reina Grande actually did cross the border as a child with her brother to meet her mom and dad who were here already on this side of the border. And so there's Cross a Thousand Mountains, I believe is what it's called. And anyway, so I highly recommend Reina Grande, so many others. So that wasn't how I wanted to access the story, but I still also wanted to highlight how difficult it is for the Latina community and the Indigenous community too, who are being also mistreated during this political time. And so I wanted to access that in a way that felt more consistent with who I am as a writer, which is to come from the psychological angle. And so I'm still talking about culture, family, and my Indigenous and Latina roots, but in a way that felt consistent with my own soul. And so that's how I accessed it there, with that sense of fear of being seen, for fear of being misseen, for fear of being abused, for fear of being attacked.
Wow.
And so that was really how I accessed it emotionally from my own perspective.
Yeah.
And then just the stories that I've encountered of.
So well done. It was that disequilibrium was very present there at that time for that aspect as well.
Yeah, and like, at the beginning of the book, they win the Powerball, right? And,
Exactly.
and like, what do you do then? Like you're so happy and then you're so scared. And then it's like, so it's a really fascinating look at something that I think so many people take for granted or don't like get a sort of like window into what that's like. I also want to touch on the fact that these motherfuckers sold them their guest house.
I was just about to say, if we don't touch on that aspect, yeah.
Like, touching on the privilege, because a lot of it has to do also with sort of the look at the haves and the have-nots, however it is you want to see,
Yeah.
like this really entitlement and privilege. And, when people have lived lives where they can get away with whatever they want, they think they can get away with whatever they want.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to just show what does happen with the land here, with everywhere, but in New Mexico in particular. And it just bothers me to no end that this is still stolen land. And so to see some people just, and like, even here, it's probably not as much as some other places, but at the same time, Epstein had a ranch here in just an hour east, like right over the mountains. The Sandias that I talk about, like right on the other side of the Sandias, was the Epstein Ranch, where girls and women and other marginalized people have been trafficked. And I mean, there's a claim that there's bodies buried there.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And they just
Opening
it's
the
like
investigation.
that bulldozer just out there, like, what's it doing?
Yeah.
Yep. And so, like, just that idea of like these entitled, violent, potentially violent people, throughout, and that they're like hiding among us, basically,
Yeah,
with their wealth and privilege.
that was so good. I wanted to touch on that. And I also feel like there's some queer elements that you brought in as
Mhm.
well that I really liked that you did. And I wanted to see if you wanted to chat about that at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, all my books do have queer elements. And that is something that, as a person who doesn't necessarily identify for various reasons, I am sort of, it's a thing, and so I just always like to write about it for my own personal reasons. I feel very drawn to queer characters. And then in terms of being an ally, like I always want to make sure that there's queer representation. My brother's gay, and so like just very early on as a teen, like going out and supporting him and being in parades and like for advocating for gay marriage when before that was legalized. And so like it's always just been a part of my, like, the heart work that I do as a part of social justice, to just make sure that there is queer representation throughout and that it's just like a natural, seamless part of the world. And then as a mom, I wanted to investigate kind of the queer aspects of my own children, as well as like any of our children that we may or may not notice, may or may not realize, or may not like have had these conversations around because of our own biases or blind spots or, those kind of misunderstandings. And so I wrapped that into part of the murder mystery, if you will. But for me, and like, this is just a natural part of my world building, and there are queer characters in all of my books. So, for instance, Maul, the main character in my previous book, Saltbones, is bisexual, and that's just like a part of her character, and it's not like really a part of the story so much as it's just like background about her,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
build it into
I
the
love that you're doing that. And you're right. Like I think that there's a lot more parents now that are thinking like you should wait for the announcement of what that's going to be versus the assumption. But I still think like societally, you're still so sort of jammed and pushed into, you know, there's better, I think, now for like the gender neutral things and experience for that. But it is really interesting to watch the younger kids like know all of the right when we went to Pride
Mhm.
Festival, just our youngest just
The
knowing
different flags, what
yes,
yeah,
and respecting all
yeah.
of it, and just more of just like and I just watched a really cool video the other day of someone like breaking things down even further and just the comment section. There's just so much to learn and to evolve and understand. And I love that your book, has parts of that and that all of them do that you're saying it's just part of your natural world building.
Mhm.
So that's
yeah.
awesome.
And then also that idea that you just touched on, that like our kids are so smart and so wise, and like listen to the kids, listen to the teens, like they have so much to teach us, and so that's another just thread that I always like to include. And I've tended to examine more mother daughter relationships, and so it was interesting, sometimes difficult emotional work, but fulfilling for me to focus also on a relationship between a mother and a teenage son. And so there were issues of toxic masculinity and worrying about our children. I actually have an article coming out I'm so excited about in People magazine online. I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And it's about this idea of like mothering a son, and how do I as a feminist raise a son to respect women and girls, like, given all of the toxicity in our culture and in our society, and just like all the messages from social media and peers and in the regular media. And so that is something that Fortuna grapples with throughout the story. That
Yeah.
really just came from my own experience of like, how do I do this? My son's an awesome guy, and like, but yet he'll sometimes like make a joke or say something that I'm like, wait, we need to break this down. Like, we need to have
Yeah.
a talk.
It's really hard to, we only have daughters or female presenting children. And as a fifth grade teacher, having all these boys and seeing those things and trying to sort of like represent or sort of, instill lessons without, knowing these aren't actually my children, but trying to one, be that sort of like role model to say, like,
Exactly.
this is how you do things. But then also, like, watching and just being really afraid because it's like, you know what? Like, especially, like, it's one thing, your son's older in different things, but when someone's 10 or 11 and I'm like, you could go either way, and I'm so
Hey,
sad about that right now because
right.
you get those flashes of both. And, in light of really, really horrific recent events, with the tragedy of Nolan Wells in
Oh,
Mississippi here, where it's like, that's, the kind of thing where it's like, no matter what, like, I don't care what's happening, never be a person that would leave someone behind. Never be someone that when they see something wrong happen and something wrong happened to say, I'm not going to do something about it. And,
it's like teaching
yeah,
integrity really early on and
yeah.
like character, like
And like,
value systems.
and it's like, in understanding like the accurate history of, if you're like, for me, if I was raising a white male, it's like, look, this world is set up to make you think that you can do whatever you want. And
Exactly.
even if you could get away with it, the emotional and the damage and the kinds of things that you are doing is not acceptable or okay. When you have to hold yourself to a higher standard and you can't perpetuate these things that have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. Like, it has to stop. And, the only way for that is, like you said, like, to consciously think about it as a parent And again, it's like goes to like the whole thing of this book where it is, she's like, I don't want these tragedies and these horrible things that have happened to happen again. And I'm so scared that they're going to, and trying as a parent to not almost make it happen because you're so scared it's going
Exactly.
to, but also
Exactly.
not turning a blind eye to say, like, if I just don't talk about it, it won't happen, because that's not the right answer either, right?
Exactly. Yeah, like that impulse for me to just like, you know, beat the hammer on like, whatever the saying is, like just to, over talk about it to the point that it's like either tuning me out or I mean, I don't think that I would make, somebody be violent necessarily, but like that, in Fortuna's case, like she is worried that she's telling these stories and then it's going to be that self-fulfilling prophecy. But I do in my own like family like worry that if I say, if I talk about it too much, it's gonna just be like, okay, mom, and like tune me out. So how much do I say in order to like really reach? But I have good kids, good smart kids, and I've taught them to be critical thinkers. And luckily for me, they do listen to me, and I think that's because I listen to them, and so there's
Mhm.
mutual respect
Yeah.
built.
Yeah.
I think that's the
Critical
foundation.
thinking is really important at
Mhm.
that age.
Exactly.
I mean, always, but like, especially when you're saying, like, are you noticing right and wrong? What are you going to do? How are you
Mhm.
handling it? All that stuff. So I wanted to just ask, it looks like you have a pretty
Like a
awesome
nationwide
celebration.
tour going on
Yes.
here,
Yes.
coming
So tell us about that as we wrap up. Where can people find you? Where will you be celebrating and signing?
Yeah, so the whole list of events is up at my website, jennifergivhan.com. So you can see that there. I'll be in New Mexico, several places, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, going to New York. I'm very excited about going to Twisted Spine. And here in Albuquerque, I'll be talking with T. Kingfisher. So that's cool.
Oh,
Ursula Vernon and I are buddies now since she moved to New Mexico, and we
amazing.
go hang out. And so I really just love her. And so she'll be chatting with me at Books on the Bosque, and then with Rachel Harrison at Twisted Spine. And so,
Amazing.
yeah, I'm
wonderful.
That
excited
store
for
is amazing.
Yeah, it's a great store.
I'm
Yeah.
excited.
Great
It looks
owners.
good. And then Skylight Books in LA, as well as Mysterious Galaxy in San Diego. So there's a few
Wow.
more, but you can go onto the events page and see.
Exciting. Wonderful. Wonderful. Will you be having any like stickers or merch or anything with that?
For all the pre-orders, we're giving out. So make sure you two have signed up for this. That is, or just I can just have one sent to you, but a postcard that is like a final reveal. That it's like what you hope happened. I hope you hope you're gonna get confirmation of
What?
Yeah, we need that.
Oh,
what
that's amazing.
Yeah, we need that.
I
so.
love them.
We
That's
do.
My
so
daughter and I
cool.
wanted to make it a part of the book, but we were like,
Uh-huh.
well, let's do. I mean, had kind of thought about it once everything was
Yes.
rolling already. So like, let's just do it as a
And
postcard
do
for
you
everyone.
order from a specific store for that,
No,
or
you
how?
can order anywhere, and there's just a link in my link tree on my Instagram, and or you can go to my website. It's there too, and just your receipt for wherever you ordered it in any format. So audiobook, ebook,
Wow, that's awesome.
hardcover,
That's
paperback, whatever,
awesome.
however you bought it.
I love it.
Done.
Yeah. Say less. Say less. Well, thank you so much. It was a true pleasure.
Yes.
I can't wait for
Yeah.
you to get more feedback at your events and just continue to hear how much others love this. And thank you again.
I appreciate you both. I'm going to carry your hug with me all the
Yeah.
way. So
All
thank
right.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.